Hi everyone, welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast and our wrap up of the Malaysian Grand Prix at the Sepang International Circuit. This weekend we have, as ever, Neil on the ground, shivering away in the media centre. How's the aircon there, Neil? Are you surviving?
Not too bad, Ed. They've managed to not turn it up full. So, yes, surviving quite nicely, thank you. Yeah, didn't have to stand outside today. 35-degree heat, which is always a massive benefit. Anytime I did have to run outside, though, I was sizzling, almost quite literally sizzling. So, very glad that I kept the outdoor action to a minimum.
It was the hottest part of the weekend, right? I mean, touching 35 degrees. It was like a showery start to the Grand Prix. It was damp for the first Moto3 sessions, but then today, they really turned up the thermometer.
Yeah, it was brutal, absolutely brutal. I think some of the photographers were saying probably the most demanding conditions that I've had all year. And there was a bit of a threat of rain, I think, at the start of the day, but that never came, and we actually didn't have like sort of cloudy, overcast skies. It was just unrelenting sun for the MotoGP race. So yeah, it was intense.
And then just last quiz question on the kind of atmosphere there in Sepang. I think it was a record-breaking attendance for the Grand Prix. The 32nd time the Grand Prix has been held in Malaysia. 24th race at Sepang International Circuit. I think just over 88,000 people through the stands today. Could you sort of detect some of that? I mean, we could hear through the TV feed, because the crowd were watching the same big screens, footage that we saw. There was kind of these audible reactions to some of the events, and there were quite a few that we'll get into on this podcast, but it seemed like a decent vibe as always at Sepang.
It was, yeah, definitely. And we had a funny situation all weekend, basically, when the stuff that we were seeing in the media center on the screens in here was probably about 5 or 6 seconds behind the live action that was going on outside. So we were basically judging what was happening by the level of noise outside. When there was a scream, it was like, uh-oh, something's going to happen, like in the sprint race, which we'll come on to, I'm sure. And also in those first laps of today's MotoGP race, when it was just like, screams basically every other 5 seconds for the first couple of laps.
That's exactly like watching a race via live timing, because the live timing, the MotoGP.com live timing is very good, but it usually runs like 10 seconds or so ahead of the action. So you're sort of like, you can see what happens before it actually happens, and it's sort of mild. Sometimes it's like having running spoilers.
That's David Emmett, of course. Dave, are you looking forward to sampling some real MotoGP soon rather than just having the digital experience?
It will be nice to get up at a civilized time in the morning and mosey on over to a very pleasant track and stay in a very pleasant place and enjoy the last race of the year. But actually, what I'm really looking forward to is the test. I mean, let's face it, that's the only thing. But it was literally the only thing that I was concerned about.
I was hoping the intensity of this triple header might make you change your ways and you suddenly become this, morning lark, and all the work is done before 10 a.m.
No. I heard I've heard there's some pigs going into the aviation industry.
Well, yeah, you're close. Well, Neil's close to Kuala Lumpur International Airport, so let's see what he sees later on. But who knows? Yes, I'm Adam, and I've missed the note shows this weekend, so sterling effort, boys, with that particular one. But Neil, when it comes to grades for the Grand Prix, I'm going to come to you first, and you're somewhat on the fence between a bit of a mediocre mark and perhaps something a little bit more lofty.
Yeah, part of me is thinking it's like a 5 because we had 2 championships already decided coming here. And you could feel that, I think, in both the Moto3 and Moto2 races. You also had the 3rd race in a row, the 6th race in 7 weeks, and you could definitely feel that. I can assure you, whenever we were speaking to our peers, our colleagues in the media center, and for 16 of the 19 laps of the MotoGP race, it was pretty dull, pretty boring. Really wasn't much going on. But you know what? I'm going to reach into my little optimistic jar deep inside the depths of my being, and I'm going to give it an 8 because the 3 laps that we did have at the start of the MotoGP race were thrilling. Probably the best, most exciting laps of the year. We've got championships going to the final race for the 3rd straight season. And there was plenty of ups and downs throughout the weekend. Some spectacular riding from both Martin and Bagnaia, the 2 championship contenders, to make this very much worth the while.
An 8, Dave. I think Neil needs saving. If we give him Another race overseas, it might just tip him over the edge. He might reach
Yeah.
for an 11 out of 10.
Yeah, it'll either be, if there is another, if there was going to be another overseas, if there was going to be a quadruple header, then I think Neil would either be giving it a 27 or a minus 80 million. But hard to say.
I'm gonna sit on Neil's fence and just say a 7. I agree with everything you said, and again, I think it was a typical Malaysian Grand Prix where the weather kind of sort of trundles along. These clouds come over and make you think, well, we're going to get some sort of little wild card here in terms of the climate. But and maybe this is kind of overstepping my moment of the Grand Prix, but I thought the first laps were sensational. I mean, it was really gripping entertainment. So I'm just going to say a solid 7. And, Sepang, in my memory, has never really delivered classic racing.
No.
I mean, the circuit is so sprawling. I mean, 5.5K, 15 corners, such diversity. Of course, as we know, this is why people like to test there. And it doesn't really throw up sort of big battles as such. We've seen some fantastic duels, of course, but nothing that really sort of lays thick in the memory. What was your estimation, Dave?
2015.
Can we at least get 10 minutes into the podcast before we mention that? Is it possible?
No.
Right.
I think it might be, actually, we might be legally obliged to mention 2015 every year. No, I mean, I am going to be the Debbie Downer of the podcast for a change. And say I'm going to give it a 5 because, I mean, it was a weekend just absolutely jam-packed with drama. Lots of things happened. Pecco's crash in the sprint race. And those first 3 laps were absolutely sensational. But they were also everything that's wrong with MotoGP in 2024. Because it was, you have to, if you don't pass in the first 2 or 3 laps, as Simon Crafar said on the broadcast, if you don't pass in the first 2 or 3 laps, that's it. You're done. Your front tire is cooked. The engine is getting too hot because precisely because of the heat. You're getting too hot. There's no energy. You're losing power. It just all it all falls to pieces. So
you might not be on a Ducati.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yes, there is a significant. I mean, there's still quite a statistically high chance that you are on a Ducati, given the enormous numbers on there. But I mean, it really was. I mean, everyone was saying. I think Luca Marini said as he got passed by a Ducati, it was they're just on another level. They're like on another planet. So yeah. So I'm going to give it a 5 because I love the drama. Loved the first few laps. Delighted also because there was a massive pile-up, which we'll talk about in a moment in the first corner. But delighted that everyone was okay. It wasn't. The racing was dire, and I think Sepang does. I think you're right. Sepang delivers terrible racing.
My moment, just to reiterate what I was saying before, and again, sort of repeating a bit what Dave said, was just those first laps of MotoGP, and it was the necessity of clean air. I mean, that seemed to be the main motivation. Okay, there was a little bit of a underlying tension there, being the championship deciders. I mean, it could easily have been in Enea Bastianini trying to make the same moves on Marc Marquez, just to try and seek that clearer channel to better lap times. But it provided just, this fantastic little snapshot of 2 riders who have been operating right at the sort of peak of their abilities, and I thought it was great stuff. I mean, I was watching it at home, and I actually sort of had to kind of pace while it was on the iPad because it was pretty nervy stuff, especially in light of what happened on Saturday. So that was my moment. Neil, what kind of stood out for you?
Yeah, I think you're right. That was absolutely incredible. Apologies for the background noise, by the way. There's just everyone's basically clearing off from the media center, so everyone's saying their goodbyes around me, and they're packing up. The broadcaster said just in front of me as well. So loud bangs may be intermittently showering my side of the recording, but my highlight of the weekend, my moment of the weekend, was qualifying yesterday. I really think this was probably a qualifying for the ages. Again, like the first couple of laps of today's race, it was Martin, it was Bagnaia facing off against each other. It was both of them upping the level in MotoGP. It was both of them demonstrating that they are the 2 best riders in the world at the moment. And the kind of the heights that they hit were just astonishing, barely believable. Martin, first of all, did a quite remarkable time, which I think was half a second faster than anyone else. And you thought, okay, he's got the upper hand. And then Bagnaia went out, basically laid down a further marker, which was 2/10 faster than Martin. It was 1.1 seconds under the previous lap record.
Yeah.
It was 9/10 quicker than Alex Marquez in third. I mean, it was just absurd stuff. So it was the kind of the perfect encapsulation of what this year has been about, and this year has very much been about those two men.
Dave, what was your moment?
Well, my moment was, we did briefly touch on it, and honestly, those two moments, the both of you qualifying was fantastic. Those first three laps were absolutely fantastic. My moment was seeing Jack Miller walking back through the pits after that first corner pileup. So many bad memories about Sepang, and that first section, although it makes for interesting racing, is just terrible on the first lap, because everyone funnels into that right-hander and then they flick back for the left-hander, and if you crash, it's very easy to run across the track. We saw Marco Simoncelli get killed in the same place. Seeing people stood on the track with the ambulance on the track around Jack Miller, I feared for the worst. It was horrible. I hated it, and actually seeing him walking there, it gave him just an enormous sigh of relief. It was fantastic. Really pleased to see him. Also, like they showed on the replay later that I think his head got stuck sort of almost in the rear wheel of maybe Alex Marquez or Brad Binder's bike.
Nakagami style.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, like, hats off to Alpine Stars for their new helmet, because it works. But yeah, that was terrifying. And genuinely, the sense of relief when Jack sitting there looking sort of mildly annoyed, which is always a good sign. If a rider is annoyed, it means they're okay. So yeah, that was my moment.
Just a reminder before we move on that the Paddock Pass podcast is backed by KTM. So go and check out ktm.com if you're in the market or you're thinking about a new motorcycle, because there's loads of choice there, particularly with the EICMA show coming up next week in Milan. I think there's going to be some new motorcycles, some new technology shown off. So keep an eye on the website as well as the social media channels to see what the Austrians have coming up. Fly Racing, if you're in the market for some new off-road gear or some of the best helmet technology when it comes to off-road riding, then have a look at the Formula S. And of course, rental.com has a fantastic, two sections, both for off-road and street. If you have a road bike and you want to try a new accessory, then head to rental.com and you can have a glimpse at loads of possible options for your particular motorcycle. Dave, I knowing sort of how meticulous you are in studying replays and footage and everything else, have you had the chance yet to kind of dissect a little bit of some of the accident that we saw going through turn one and the exit and going into turn two, because it was pretty significant, especially for sort of the Red Bull KTM team and Fabio Quartararo. And it was, like you say, pretty harrowing there for a while.
Yeah, exactly. No, I couldn't, I haven't had a chance to look at it. And to be honest, it's not the most fun part of the job. They did say, I mean, the FIM stewards did put out an explanation of it, saying that basically, because everyone got piled up, I think it was Brad Binder who ran in, who touched the rear of Alex Marquez, just because everyone was all piled up. They all got they all got piled up, and they all got caught up, and then it was just a chain reaction. I think Joan Mir said that he ended up actually running over Jack Miller's legs, and he was like really worried about that. And then he went down to the KTM garage later on, and Jack was sitting there and said, he sort of went and said, "Are you okay?" So yeah, no, fine, just a few bruises on my legs. So I think it was an enormous relief for him as well. I think it was also just really stressful for for everyone involved. When you don't know whether someone is okay, it's hard to express the tension in the paddock. It's so there's a tangible sense of sort of like fear for the worst in the air, and then when you find out like it's okay, then you get that sense of relief. But you could see that I mean, Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia, it was already an incredibly stressful situation for them. And then to have something like this happen, and then also have to go on to into the quick start procedure, which is much more difficult because you don't have, you've got your engine. The engine heats up a lot more. The bike heats up a lot more. You've only got one mechanic on the grid, or I think two mechanics on the grid. You don't have the full entourage. You don't have the protection, especially in Malaysia, of an umbrella girl or an umbrella boy or whatever, someone to protect you from the heat, to hold that over you. It's much, much more challenging. It's much more difficult, and it just adds to all of the stress. And I think, almost think that maybe the first couple of laps were also, it was all that stress sort of like built up into one giant explosion of action.
Neil, what was it like on the ground? Because, for the third year in a row, Malaysia has been this sort of cauldron of tension. This kind of ramped things up, and the riders headed off of the restart without really knowing what the situation was for, Jack Miller. I mean, Brad Binder was already back in the box. He didn't attempt to race because he had a sore left shoulder. It was, pretty nervy, and we could feel it through the screen. So how was it there?
Yeah, pretty tense. Yeah, it was definitely. I mean, it's just been a really tense weekend on the whole. Everything, you felt the kind of the repercussions of the championship with pretty much every session. I mean, just talking about the championship first and foremost, there was a sense that the two protagonists were trying to get under each other's skin in very subtle ways, nothing too direct. But yeah, the fact that they started pretty aggressively, I think our team just narrowly avoided hitting Bagnaia's right leg as they were breaking for turn one before the red flag came out, and then they just went basically back out again and repeated and rinsed for the restart. So yeah, there was definite tension with regards to whether Jack was okay. But we only found out whenever you guys did with the shot of him on the screen. And then if you're talking about the tension with regards to the championship, then yeah, it's been pretty much hanging over us all weekend.
Dave, what was your feeling kind of on Saturday? Because I very much had the impression that the championship was done. I kind of thought it would be a long shot if Martin sealed it today, just because Bagnaia is so strong. And obviously his crash going into turn 9 was a freak thing, because he explained on Saturday that he wasn't particularly pushing at that time into that corner. So you kind of think he's not going to make the same sort of mistake twice, or the chances of him hitting the bump and that same outcome happening are going to be very slim, because as he explained, he's done many laps doing the same line, same routine. I just kind of thought there was a formality to it. The points gap, there was always this kind of potential sort of tension in like a Saxon ring outcome for Martin. You never know if someone's going to slip off and change things radically. And if Martin had not picked up any points today, then it would only have been a split of 4 go into the final round, which, as we kind of know, is going to be Barcelona, but hasn't been officially confirmed. I just wondered, watching the race today, what was your feeling about the championship overall? Did you kind of feel like it was done?
I mean, I felt like it was done after Malaysia, after Thailand, because I mean, the problem with this championship is that there are 2 riders who are so much stronger than the rest. I think Marcus was asked about, sort of, will anybody be able to help Pecco getting in between? And he said, "Oh, look at Anea. Anea finished 10 seconds behind. There's no point trying to slow the race up to try to get people." To bring people 10 seconds forward. It's just impossible. So like after Malaysia, I felt that it was pretty much Thailand. In the bag. After Thailand. Yeah. I'm getting my Southeast Asian countries. Yeah, that's right. After Vietnam. No. I'm not that old. After Buriram, I really thought that it was going to be impossible, just because even though the points gap is close, the amount of points on the available. I mean, I went through, I think, last night of something that's been like 30. There's 37 sprint and GP races that there've been. They've been together on the podium in 18 of those, and they've I think at least one of them has been on the podium for 35 of those races. They're just too close together. It literally is. One of them has to make a mistake, and if you're going to bet on someone making a mistake, you bet on the rider with 8 DNFs.
Yeah, I think there was that sense certainly on Saturday. Once Pecco crashed, I mean, everyone in the media centre just looked at each other and thought, "That's it, it's done." And I have to say that Martin, the way he's been carrying himself all weekend, has been really quite impressive. Did the notes show with Pete McLaren on Thursday, and we were commenting after the pre-event press conference just how calm Martin was and how open he was about things. Saying that this time last year he was really struggling with the pressure, with the anxiety, wasn't able to sleep. Whereas this time he was going to do the presentation, I think, on the top of the Petronas Towers on the Wednesday before the event, where it was basically a photo opportunity of both him and Bagnaia with the championship trophy. Facing off, and he said, it was enjoyable. I felt privileged to be here, and just how he reacted to certain quirks and challenges throughout the weekend was very impressive. I mean, he looked really pissed off in part for me after he missed out in pole position, and I thought that looks as though I could maybe niggle away at him. Yet he was sensational in the sprint, performed just so well. So yeah, I felt that it was maybe done, but after today, yeah, okay, it's a very comfortable lead, but I wouldn't say it's done. I wouldn't write it off. I mean, it's been a championship of mistakes, as Bagnaia has called it, and I still have the niggling suspicion that a cold, blustery, potentially wet Barcelona in an advanced stage of November could offer up a further surprise.
Yeah, I think that's the only hope. Spot on about both riders being or appearing very calm. I think Jorge Martinez just made a massive step in that respect, and he said himself, "What's the real difference between last year? Last year, I wasn't ready to win." He said, "This year he is. He's much more mature." But I also think there's I think I said this on the notes yesterday. There's very much a bit of a swan feeling about it, where they're going around looking to be very calm on the surface while paddling around like lunatics underneath. So yeah, I think there's a lot more tension that we don't see. Again, Pecco Bagnaia is really good at hiding that sort of thing, so I think there is a lot of tension. But yeah, there's tension there, but we're not seeing it. They're both doing a really fantastic job at hiding it.
Bagnaia certainly has the benefit of experience. And, I think Martin also passed the pressure test as well as the heat test because, he wilted somewhat in India last year, probably when the temperatures were closest to what, we saw or experienced in Malaysia this weekend or Cambodia or wherever you want to go to take MotoGP day. But yeah, I mean, it's the championship goes on. And Neil, just a quick word about the winner. 10 races now in a season. And even Bagnaia somewhat forlornly admitted in the official press conference that he might set a record for being the rider to have 10 Grand Prix wins in a single season and still not be leading the championship standings. It's a bizarre situation for him to be in because he was really the standard again today.
Yeah, he was absolutely exceptional. And I mean, I don't think it's a surprise that he went toe-to-toe with Martin in the first couple of laps. I think the surprise was that Martin was just reacting as aggressively as he did, and I think you have to commend Martin for that as well, because he didn't really need to take those risks early doors, but he was right there, putting it absolutely all on the line. But yeah, once again, I mean, it's a kind of typical archetypal Bagnaia weekend, isn't it? Where there is a mistake or a bad performance in the sprint, he looks pissed off, deflated, writing them off on Saturday, and then he basically saves his best for Sunday. And I think the situation would be a little bit different if Martin wasn't defending for the most part of this season. I think that has been a factor in Bagnaia winning so much and Martin finishing second so often, because Martin hasn't had to win. He's just had to manage the gap, and he has managed it brilliantly. But yeah, I mean, commendable stuff from Bagnaia once again. He has probably been the most explosive rider this year in 10 wins. I mean, I think there's only 5 other riders in history that have done that. Agostini, Rossi, Marquez, Stoner, and Doohan. I mean, you're talking about the elite of the elite. The best of the very best of our sport. So, for Bagnaia to be in that conversation is quite impressive, and it's just remarkable that yes, it's not a kind of runaway success for him. It's a testament to just how good Martin's been that he is still leading the championship against the guy that's won 10 races.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because and the championship basically comes down to Jorge Martin. Well, not Jorge Martin in the sprints, to Pecco Bagnaia in the sprints. because Martinez outscored Bagnaia by 48 points in the sprints, and vice versa. Bagnaia has only outscored Martin by, I think, 34 points, and that's the ball game. That's just the whole thing. Really, that's what it comes down. Or sorry, 24 points. So that's what it comes down to. It comes down to just being completely outperformed during the sprint, falling off the DNFs. I actually do think that Pecco Bagnaia is a bit underrated, because, as you say, what he's done has just been astonishing. He's underrated because he's on the best bike, so people are expecting him to be able to do that. But he's up against some fairly stiff competition as well, and I think he's a much better rider than some people think. And I think we're really going to see the measure of him next year.
Yep, and at the next race as well, Dave. I mean, if he rescues this championship, then I think that will.
He's not
any of his achievements.
He's not going to. I mean, literally, the only thing that's going to save Pecco is bad weather. It is bad weather and something weird happening. Because if you, like I said, these two are so much better than the rest. They're so far down the road that it's only going to be a mistake or bad weather or something like that will make the difference.
I have to say, I'm a bit surprised or I was a bit surprised watching the race at what Pecco was doing. I was sitting next to our good friend and colleague Peter McLaren, and we were saying, what's he doing? Why is he pulling away? Why is he streaking clear of Martin when he needs so obviously needs Bastianini and Marquez to get between the pair of them? Yet he was just riding as if he needed to win the race to take the championship lead. And I kind of thought he's not really assessing the full championship picture here. I did ask him about this in the press conference afterwards, and he said, "I'm not that kind of rider."
Yeah, nice slaggy question there, Neil. You meant
yeah,
you're trying to get him to. You're trying to get him to sort of, admit to a sort of darker side to his character, but you made him look whiter than white.
Yeah, in my defense, he had said to someone in the TV broadcaster said yesterday that he was going to create a mess or try to create a mess in the race. I think someone overheard him say that, Alex Marquez, who was then telling us journalists in his or before his debrief. So I was expecting Bagnaia to maybe try and dip into the dark arts. He said that's not really my character. I think Marquez gave probably a more realistic assessment of the situation, where he said, if your rivals, if I or Bastianini or Alex Marquez was 3 seconds behind Bagnaia, okay, you can get to the front, you can try and slow down the pace, you can try and see if someone gets is brave enough to jump up and try and overtake Martin. Look at the final results, and Bastianini was 10 seconds back of Bagnaia. I mean, you're not going to be able to slow Martin down to the extent of 10 seconds or 10.4 seconds as it was at the checkered flag. And Mark also said the kind of remarkable thing about following that tussle in the first laps is they were knocking lumps out of each other and overtaking. I think it was 11 overtakes in 3 laps, something quite astonishing. Yet the pace wasn't falling off. Mark was really having to work hard to stay with him. Normally in that kind of situation, they're slowing each other up and everyone's bottlenecked up behind, but they were still managing to go very, very competitive pace. And yeah, as Dave's mentioned, that they have been so far in front of the others that they can afford to knock lumps out of each other and still be setting a pace which stretches the league group apart.
Dave, did Marquez drop the ball on this one? I mean, he really could have potentially interfered because he was there just sort of shadowing, watching, observing, and then ultimately dropped into turn 15. I mean, he came back. I mean, he took valuable points, to try and keep the battle for third, which is a kind of smaller narrative, of course, head into the final round. But I just wondered, from your seat, did you think that maybe the Catalan was going to interfere in things?
I think he would have loved to have interfered with things, but I don't think he was fast enough. That's certainly what he was saying, sort of afterwards in his debrief. Like
he did was interfere in things. He crashed out, and he
yeah. Of course, yes, of course. It's all a foul conspiracy. No, I mean, like he would have loved to have been in between there, but he can't. He's just not fast enough. No one is. These two are so much better than the rest at the moment. And like qualifying was the absolute demonstration of that, where they were, the next rider is a second behind. It's nearly a second behind. They're so much faster than everyone else. There's no point even expecting anyone or hoping for someone to interfere because they're just not. I mean, like, it's more chance of me interfering with the championship than Marc Marquez, and that's saying something.
Any particular reason why Fabio Quartararo, I mean, aside from being punted by a KTM in the first sort of start of the race, was there any reason why the Yamaha man wasn't really with it today, Dave? That we didn't see the same kind of speed and form that we saw during qualifying and also the sprint?
Yes, the reason he was slower in the sprint, or if it was slower than in the sprint, was basically because he got tangled up in that first corner. I think he had to swap bikes. He was jumping onto a bike with his wet setup. I'm not sure he had the tyres that he wanted to use. He was using an engine which was very, very old, and because obviously they had the new engine on Friday, which went pop, and they haven't been able to use. So he was using a very, very old engine with a lot less power, and especially at a place like Sepang with so much heat, you're always going to suffer. So yeah, basically he was a victim of that first corner pileup, but the real problem was that he lost his good bike and had to ride his second one.
Guys, just before we move on to winners and losers of the podcast, it's not been confirmed, but it's been kind of announced by Dorna that the final round will take place at the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya in 2 weeks' time, filling the date slot that the Valencian Grand Prix had. Not very surprising, extremely easy logistically for the teams and also the organisers. Maybe also quite I don't know, apt, I guess you could say, in terms of proximity to the Comunidad de Valencia, in terms of maybe giving some sort of token gesture or helping out the efforts in there some way. But just your initial thoughts. We'll talk about it perhaps in more depth on the podcast during the week, but not a great deal of surprise really that the circuit, the Barcelona Catalunya, is going to be in there. But living in the city, I'm a little concerned about the climate in mid-November.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it was the best option also because one of the limiting factors was tyres. They needed to get tyres. I think Pete McLaren asked Piero Terramasso of Michelin about it and said, yeah, we need 14 days to produce tyres. And just the logistics of getting tyres from Michelin to the track means that they'll get enough to the track, or it's an easy to do from there. It isn't easy to do at all anywhere to anywhere else. I think also because some of the teams use Barcelona as a test track, they've probably got tyres which work there hanging around, so that makes it a little bit easier. And I think, perhaps they also want to have it in Spain precisely because of exactly what happened, because it has been, I mean, absolutely terrible. I mean, I personally, because we go to Valencia so often, it is, and I've stayed in some of the places which have been so incredibly badly hit. I mean, personally, it's quite touching to see how awful it has been there.
Yeah, it's been absolutely terrible. Really difficult to watch from the other side of the world. And, at times have felt slightly guilty about flying on and talking about something as trivial as bike racing, considering some of the terrible events that have taken place back home. Just a quick thing on Mitchell and Dave. I think we spoke to Michelin spokesperson today. They said it takes roughly 7 days to make tyres and then to transport them within Europe, whereas if it's outside Europe, then it becomes a good deal more complicated. So for it to have retained this original date of the Grand Prix that was supposed to be in Valencia, it would have had to have been in Europe.
Neil, just quickly, who is your ganador from the Grand Prix this weekend?
Mi ganador fue Marc Marquez, because I believe that he did drop the ball in some ways. I thought it was disappointing that he crashed out of third because he was doing an exceptional job, but he was doing an exceptional job, and I think he did an exceptional job all weekend. Well, Saturday and Sunday, he was second in the sprint. He would have been third in today's race had he not dropped it at turn 15. And this was around one of his two weakest tracks, he was telling us, all weekend long. And for him to be even in the same stratosphere as both Bagnaia and Martin this weekend, I thought spoke of just how well he is adapted to the Ducati GP23, and how maybe fearful or what's the word, fearsome it could be for the championship next year. If he's this close on a year-old bike, then on the same machinery, it could be quite devastating around one of his weaker tracks. So I think Mark was seriously impressive, even if Sunday's result didn't quite bear fruit.
Dave, who was your winner?
My winner is Jorge Martin, because I mean, like, he leaves here with the championship as close to wrapped up as it could have been if he, the only way it could have been better if he's actually done it. The task facing Pecco Bagnaia is absolutely monumental, and Martin did everything right. He remained calm. He won the sprint race. He didn't get upset. He didn't get he didn't get disrupted. He didn't get disturbed. He just did everything he could. He got lured into trying to battle with Bagnaia, but when he realised that it was not going to happen, he let Bagnaia go and just settled for it. And he said, I think with about 4 or 5 laps to go, that there was one lap where he closed nearly like 4 or 5 tenths, and he thought, oh, maybe we can do this. And then he nearly lost the front at turn 9, and thought, you know what, 20 points is great. I'll take that instead. It was just an incredibly mature. It was an incredibly mature performance. He deserved the win, and I think he's going to be a really deserving champion.
Fair enough. For my winner, I'm going to say David Alonso, because for the second time in recent weeks, he's been compared with Valentino Rossi. Another victory today, 12 in a season. I think that's 6 in a row. 13, sorry. 6 in a row, equaling Rossi's record. From 1997? Yeah. So, that's a pretty exalted company, it has to be said. And Alonso's definitely on the path. The predecessor to the Alonso hype is Guevara, making the podium, Neil, for the first time in Moto2. Somewhat fortuitously, because we have to maybe consider Jake Dixon as a loser for not being able to count the laps correctly in the Grand Prix. But the fact that Guevara came, onto the podium, and also, I think he finished 6th in the previous Grand Prix. So there's definitely been a little bit of an upscale in terms of his ability to judge what's going on in the intermediate category. I mean, he's still only 20 years old, is something that potentially sort of save his career, because it's been a really tough 2 years, as he kind of intimated in the Parc Fermé interview. So, can I just make a quick mention also for other people on our Patreons that correctly predicted that Pecco Bagnaia would win the Grand Prix? Jono, TV Room Raccoon, Adam Cole, Stuart Edwards, Lynn Biggs, Yanni Valtonen, and Bomber70. And Jono correctly predicted the winners of both the sprint and the race. And I'd just like to point out, Jono, that nobody likes a know-all. Okay, so don't get too cocky with it. Don't feel free to send us any messages, because we definitely will not respond to your superior knowledge. Do we move on to losers? Or Neil, you had a comment?
Just a quick comment about David Alonso. He just always knows the right thing to say, as well as his remarkable talent on the bike. He has a great gift for just being able to choose the right words in his second language, which I think is remarkable for an 18-year-old. And a quick word on Dixon. Maybe was the subject of some ridicule, but he actually said that his dash, the lap counter on his dash was incorrect. So when he started the first lap, it had counted 2 laps. He was checking his dash throughout the race to judge how many laps he had to go. And when he crossed the line for the penultimate time, his dash said, "You have started the last lap." So that is where the mistake came from. And he said, it was obviously devastating, but also they need to have a word with Magneti Morelli to understand exactly WTF happened.
Yeah, but then also, if there's not like a Z-list celebrity holding out the checkered flag, that usually means the race is still going on, I don't know how easy it is to see from the track in Sepang International Circuit, but you've got to kind of factor those things in. Speaking of other unfortunates, my loser for the Grand Prix was Brad Binder. Of course, being part of that chain reaction, as they've called it, that sort of stunted the Grand Prix less than a lap into the distance, hurting his left shoulder, and not being able to take part in the Grand Prix. And it seemed like he and the team were trying some pretty radical experimentation on Friday, which didn't work. They had to revert. Okay, they got some information. It was almost like it seems like a scenario for the South African that's been repeated all too often. He's had to test while racing, and it's been pretty unsettling, and it's made him have to sort of search the limits in terms of performance and results. And the upshot, I'm not too sure he cares too much, but Pedro Acosta's now jumped to P5 in the championship by 3 points, I think, over Binder. So yeah, not a great Grand Prix, and I hope he's going to be in good conditions to race, in 2 weeks' time. Dave, who was your loser?
My loser is going to be Franco Morbidelli, because for a number of reasons. He looked like he got a pretty good start today, then crashed out and sort of joins in. But the longer this goes on, the more he's being shown up by everyone else on a GP24. He's struggling to beat riders on a GP23, and he's had a year. He should be pretty much up to speed. Yes, he doesn't have the same level of experience, but you see what Marc Marquez is doing. Marc Marquez is Marc Marquez, but you see what he's doing with a year on the GP23. He says, he understands completely the bike completely. He's there. He's right there. By the end of the first year, you should be able to be competitive. And Franco's just not being competitive.
Neil, who is your loser from the Malaysian Grand Prix?
My loser is going to become my losers, and my losers are KTM, Aprilia, Honda, and Yamaha. All the MotoGP factories which are called Ducati. I think I did this for one of my losers around this time last year. And it's just the simple fact that despite Ducati's ludicrous domination throughout 2024, they're becoming more dominant, if anything. And you look at qualifying yesterday, incredible performance from both Bagnaia and Martin. The first non-Ducati in qualifying was Jack Miller in 7th, 1.2 seconds slower across the qualifying line. That is just an absurdly big gap. Another whitewash for Ducati, taking all the podiums in both the sprint and in the feature race today. You have to laud them. You have to say fair play, exceptional what they're doing. They have designed probably the best MotoGP bike there ever has been in the world, the most sophisticated in terms of all the different elements which make it so strong. But yeah, it's not. You're not getting the impression that anyone's any closer at the end of this season than they were at the start. And I think that's slightly concerning for the spectacle, because it looks as though, unless something really dramatic happens, it's going to be something similar next year. Maybe not to the same extent, but it's hard to imagine anyone getting close.
Yeah, Luca Marini said that as well. He basically sort of said, we've got to do something about Ducati because they're stinking the place up. They're just ruining the spectacle. Yeah, exactly. But hats off to them. Ducati did a fantastic job, but it is ruining it.
And just a quick word, not all negative. We have to say fair play to Ducati, because whenever Jorge Martin announced that he was going to Aprilia next year, one of the questions that we asked ourselves many times in the podcast was, would they interfere? Would they try and do something that would stop Martin from winning the championship, because Peck was the golden child and they clearly want to wear the number one in the factory team next year.
Still one race left, Neil.
Still one race left, but so far there hasn't been anything that would suggest that there has been any interfering with the number 89. And again, that has to be commended.
Okay, that's it from the Sepang International Circuit, Neil. Safe trip home. Dave, I hope you can work a little bit more efficiently, enjoy some Dutch sunshine. We know how rare that can be. And we'll be back for the show during midweek, when we'll also talk about the Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League, because some people care about it and other people don't. And maybe one of the people on this call is particularly interested in how he's getting on in the rankings. So we'll adjourn.
No, I'm not going to mention it. I'm just not going to bring up how I'm doing in the Paddock Pass podcast, Alpine Stars League. I won't mention that I'm 51st and ahead of you all.
Right, okay. Well, nicely done. Thanks for listening, everybody. Send us some comments or any questions, and we'll be back midweek and building up to Barcelona for the end of 2024 MotoGP.